welcome to the part where we'll create the effects simulation for the smoke coming out from the ice and this dry ice type of smoke coming out from the mouth. So let's now focus on this area. So what we are going to need is we're going to use these carved out details as our source. So I'm going to basically create another ray onto the surface. So we can actually create a new network box here. Let's do the network box. Let's call it pyro FX. Pyro FX. Okay, and let's color it red. So we'll need a ray node. So I'm going to ray these again onto the surface of the pumpkin, but I want it to be modified slightly. Okay, so what we are going to do after the extrusion, so which is going to be here, so we're going to take this part in the carve face details after we extruded the pumpkin, after we smoothed it out, and after we reversed it. We're going to take this and we are going to basically create some additional details on top. So I'm going to put down a subdivide node. So we want to ray these details right onto the shape that already has the final detailing that we created here, right? So we'll just grab bits and pieces out of it. So I'm going to grab all these. Actually, we could have just taken these 4 nodes. So let's select these 4, Control C, Control V here. Yeah, I don't need the subdivide anymore. Okay, so let's enable these. So now we would have just the distorted pumpkin without the carving. And also I'm going to add this extra distortion, Control C, Control V, just so we start our emission from exactly the same shape that is our final pumpkin. Okay, so that's our final pumpkin. So we are going to now ray the facial curves onto this. This is our collision, and we are going to do, oops, turn it on. Let's take these from here. Just so we don't mess with this part, I just want to recreate it here. So we have now the ray. The ray actually doesn't work out of the box. We need to do vector, again right click, delete channels, and then set this to -1. Okay, there we go. So now this is mapped. So then I'm going to create a group node. I'm just going to convert this into curves, and we can just group the edges. We are going to turn off the base group. We're going to turn on group by edges. Make sure that we're grouping the edges, and turn on unshared edges. So this will group the edges, and then we'll say curve from edges. Okay, and then we will say that yeah, I think this would even work without the group. Yeah, I'm not sure why I did the group first, but okay, cool. So we have the curve now, and we are going to use this curve to source our pyro. So the thing is, if we visualize the pumpkin, so let's visualize it here. Okay, so that's our pumpkin. I want these shapes to be hidden inside as much as it's possible. So we will be doing some adjustments to the position of these curves, and feel free to actually choose different areas or emit from, you know, different parts. You don't really need to follow this exactly. So what I wanted to show you, that we will be basically selecting certain parts of the mesh. So I will start with the eyes. Okay, so let's select the eyes. So I'm going to blast the mouth. So if you select the curve from edges and then go into the viewport and press S for selection, and if you have the select primitives, if you don't have it, you can press 4. So 3 would be selecting edges, and then 4 would be selecting connected primitives. So you can select the mouth, click on the mouth, and shift click on the nose, and then press delete on the keyboard. So it will just give us the eyes. All right, and then basically we are going to continue from this. So for the eyes, I only have the bottom part selected. So basically I'm only sourcing from this bottom part. So we'll have to select that manually. So in the blast node, we want to go to the viewport, press S for selection, and then we need to go to the edge mode. Let's press 3. So then I'm going to be holding shift and then selecting the edges on the bottom, just like that. And then I'll do the same for the other part. Okay, and then after I'm happy with the selection, I'm going to press delete key on the keyboard. So it will actually delete what I need. So in the dissolve node, we're going to change the operation to dissolve non-selected, and this will be my main shape. So after this, I'm going to transform this, transform. And in the transformation, I want to push this back towards the inner part of the pumpkin. So again, let's make sure that we see the pumpkin. Yeah, so that's the pumpkin. Okay, so we're gonna move it inside. So good, because I don't want to see the smoke source from the eyes, right? So if you look at this one, we definitely don't see where the smoke is coming from. It feels like it's just coming from inside, but it's just like hidden inside there. All right, so let's move this back to minus 0.15, and we will also scale it down a little bit, 0.95. Again, if you're using a different design, these would be completely different numbers, so you don't need to exactly follow this. So after that, we are going to add a pyro source. So pyro source. And pyro source basically would take only the points from the geometry. Let's actually turn off the template from the pumpkin. So you can see that we have these points. If you want to scatter points on top of this, you can change this to surface scatter, so you get like more control over how many points you have. I actually went with just these points. And then what you basically need to create with this node is 2 attributes for any pyro simulation that is smoke based. You need to go to initialize and use the source smoke. So this will create density and temperature attribute on the points, and then the density and temperature attribute will be converted to volumetric fields, and then pyro solver would take those fields as the initial source and then continue the simulation by injecting them every frame. We also have a p-scale attribute that would help us in generating the volumes. So after the pyro source, we are going to adjust the density a little bit. So if we click on I and click on density, assuming again we have it in the viewport. Let's turn it again. Okay, there we go. So you can see density is pretty even everywhere. I want to randomize it a little bit, so we can put down attribute adjust float, and by default it will be working on the p scale, but I will change this to density, and then we can just apply some kind of interesting noise to the density. Basically we just need to set the operation to multiply, and then the pattern type we want to be noise. Now you can see the purple areas would be 0 density, and then the red areas would be density of 1. We can also reduce the element size to something like 0.05. Okay, and then we can say the minimum density I want to be 0.25 and the maximum is 1. Feel free to adjust this. Okay, so after that I want to create a velocity. So the idea is that we have the pumpkin mesh and the points are actually inside. I think they are way too inside now. Yeah, maybe we need to move them a bit closer forward. So let's move them a bit closer to the edges. With this transform node, maybe we can do that. Yeah, something a bit closer like that. Okay, that should be good. Okay, maybe not that much. That one. Yeah, something more like that. So anyways, they will not be aligned perfectly. So we need the smoke to be pushed outwards. So imagine it will be pushed outwards, and then the buoyancy would kick in and it will be rising up, right? So we need to create a velocity that would push the generated smoke outward. So to do that, we need a velocity, point velocity. So let's create a point velocity node. And it's very simple. So the point velocity would just create some vectors on the points, and you can actually visualize them. Right now we don't have any, because it just assumes that if you have a moving surface, it will calculate the deformation, but we would just create, we would say set to value, and then I would add a velocity in z direction, so 0.25. And we can actually preview those vectors if we click on V. There we go. So it will be pushed forward. And then of course we can add some curl noise to randomize it a little bit. We don't need much, just 0.1, 0.1 and 0.1 in swirl size. Just a tiny bit of noise there. Okay, so something like this would make the emission a bit more interesting. Okay, next we will convert all of these fields, density, temperature, and velocity, into volumetric, all of those attributes into volumetric fields. So let's press tab, type volume, rasterize attributes. So this is a very common workflow. I'm going to take the volume rasterize attributes, and then in the attributes I'm going to say density, temperature. I usually like to split the velocity from these two, because when you use a small particle scale to make the source thinner, the velocity might not be captured completely. So we'll create a separate volume rasterize attribute, and we'll just have velocity in there. So this one is going to be the velocity. And if I preview the volume rasterize, it will give me this huge box. Well, first of all, it is using a very low resolution voxel size. So to increase the amount of voxels, we can reduce the voxel size to something like 0.00875. This was my final resolution. You can see everything is sharper, but on top of that, we also want to reduce the particle scale to something like 0.1875. That was my final value. So this looks like eyes of venom, but this is going to be our smoke source. Also, you would see the density and temperature here, which we can adjust. We can say that I only want to see the density because that's what we will be sourcing. So this will give you a much more accurate view. Now you can see with this particle scale, the source is very thin and it wouldn't be able to capture any velocity in some areas, right? So that's why we want to keep the particle scale a bit higher on the velocity. So maybe not 0.1, but 0.5. And then the resolution I usually also set a little bit higher, so we can actually just copy parameter, paste relative reference. It will link these two, but I also want to multiply this to 1.5 so it doesn't go as high resolution with this velocity. All right, so we have our velocity, we have our density and temperature, and notice again, before they were point attributes, and now if I middle mouse click on this, they will be volumetric fields. So let's merge these two like this. And after that, we are going to add a pyro solver. So for quick effects development, I recommend using a smaller voxel resolution, not this final one. So let's first make sure that the pyro voxel size is the same as this one. It's very important to link this to the source, okay? So I'm just gonna copy this one, Control C to the pyro, Control V. But then I want the pyro to drive everything, right? So I just want to change the voxel size here, and these two would change automatically. So we're just gonna select this, copy parameter, select the volume rasterize, right click, paste relative reference. So now the pyro is going to be driving everything. And I usually like to do the multiplication. So if I multiply this by 2, my resolution will be 2 times smaller and it's going to be faster to compute. So for the initial result, let's put a display flag on the pyro solver. I really recommend having a dark gray background for this to see everything much better. So let's press play and see what we have. So by default, we will get a very high push upward because the way that temperature gets injected is just going to push everything up by a lot, right? So we would need to adjust some of the settings in the simulation here. So first thing I want to adjust is I want to reduce the speed of this push upward. So we can do that quite easily if we go to the shape, and the buoyancy is basically a multiplier on the temperature. It will define how fast the smoke will be rising up or downward based on the temperature values. So I'm just going to divide this by 10, so we wouldn't have this much of a rise right away. Okay, so it would be a little bit less, and it would also take the velocity now, right? You can see it getting pushed forward, and then it gets up. I also want to see these red outline boxes, so I'm just going to select this and do smooth shaded. Oh, I think it's because of that. Yeah, so let's turn off any template flags, and we're just going to see the pyro result. So next we can adjust the sourcing. I want to source way more smoke from this, and if we go to sourcing, you can see all the sources here. So the density is set to 1. I'm going to set it to 15. I want to source much more smoke. I don't want the velocity to be pushing it out that much, so I'm going to set the velocity attribute to 0.15. Okay, and then let's press play. Okay, so this is better. However, we don't have the pumpkin collider there yet. So once we add the collider, this would greatly reduce the amount of smoke that we have, because part of it would be deleted. That would be hitting and getting inside of the collision geometry, and it would be also, it would have some obstacles rising up. So let's add our final pumpkin. Let's actually put this a bit down. Oops. make sure it's inside. Yeah, let's put this one down. And let's take our pumpkin, which is the final pumpkin. Let's convert this to a VDB and have it as a collider. So the general rule is you can convert a static object into a VDB or a dynamic object, and then if you plug it into the second input, assuming that you have the name set correctly. So in the pyro solver, if you go to collision tab, if you change the collision type SDF plus volume velocity, this would give you a way of plugging in a custom VDB. So this is useful, especially if you have a deforming geometry. So you can cache out the collision and then plug it in. Otherwise, if you keep it as collision geometry, it will be generating it on the fly, which is not ideal, right? So we want to keep everything optimized and cache everything. So from here, I'm going to do VDB on polygons. And again, it's important to call the distance VDB as collision. Otherwise, the solver wouldn't understand it. So we can just select the solver, select this name, Control C, select VDB, Control V. So now it's named correctly. After this, we need to add some resolution. So 0.0025 was the resolution that I used. Okay. So now if we plug this in, and of course you can cache it so it doesn't have to recalculate every time you open Houdini. You can pre-cache it and then you can plug it in. I'm just going to do it live for now. So in the pyro solver, now we have a collider. Let's now press play and see. So you can see now it will be not going through. It will be actually colliding with the edges. So this is pretty good. Now, to achieve a more interesting result, you can see the smoke here is quite turbulent and detailed. It's not as billowy, right? It's not mushrooming out as much as you can see here. And it also has this kind of more turbulent feeling. So we can adjust that, all of that in the shape tab. So let's select the pyro solver. We can go to the shape tab. And now we can start adding those specific features. So in the shape, we can say that I want to add some disturbance. The disturbance would distort the outer edge of the smoke mainly, add some edge details, and then turbulence would distort the overall kind of velocities and force the smoke to be pushed and pulled in different directions. So I'm going to unroll the disturbance rollout, and then I'm going to use 10 in here, and the block size is going to be quite smaller, so 0.125. So the block size is basically the size of the details that you would get on the edges of this smoke. The pulse length is how fast those details are going to be changing, and then the threshold range is basically how deep that noise is allowed to enter the smoke density. Okay, so I'm going to increase the threshold a little bit so it is going to cut out a bit more from this shape. So let's check this out. Let's see what we have. So you can see now it is working, but it is basically disturbing the smoke way too much. So what I actually want, I don't want it to be disturbed everywhere. I want it to only be disturbed in a very fast moving areas. So the very fast moving areas where it kind of billows and balloons, mushrooms like that, it will be distorted more, and then the areas where it's moving slower, it will be not basically noised up that much. So we can use that by using the control field. If you turn on use control field, you would see that it says speed, but speed wouldn't be generated right away. You would need actually to turn on the speed calculation from smoke velocity, and you can do it in the fields tab. So if you go to the fields tab, you can turn on the speed here, and then now if I press play, you would see that disturbance would mainly distort the top part where it's mushrooming, and the bottom would be a bit cleaner. Okay, so that's our disturbance. Next, let's take a look at turbulence. And actually, while we are at the fields tab, let's quickly adjust the dissipation. So you can see that in here, the smoke actually dissipates really, really fast. It makes it look more magical, and it almost looks like fire, actually. So if we take a look at the dissipation, the smoke is actually living quite long. It only taking 10% of its density every time it is dissipating. We want to increase that. I'm going to multiply this to 3.5. So it will be taking, it will be subtracting 35% from its density. So now let's press play, and you would see that the smoke now disappears much faster. Okay. We can also set the, yeah, let's go to the shape and let's add some turbulence to the shape. So let's turn on turbulence. Turbulence would just push it, pull it to different directions overall. So I have turbulence set to pretty much default. I just reduced the swirl size to 0.25, and I've increased the maximum details to 3. Okay, if you press play, now you would see that maybe we need to resimulate again. Yeah, I think that should be good. All right, and then additionally to this, we can also add a little bit of viscosity that would make it look more like flame licks. So if we turn on viscosity, and viscosity in general in Pyro, it will just blur out the velocity field, so all the shapes are going to be a little bit smoother than they are. So in here, I'm going to add a very, very low amount. Be careful with this value. It can really kill all the details on your smoke, but adding a little bit would make the shapes look more interesting, especially if you're simulating something that is underwater or something magical. It can definitely help. All right, so that's our motion. Now, additionally, I want to add some expansion. So as the smoke is going to be emitted and as it going to be rising up, I want it to be expanding a little bit. And we can do that with the divergence. So if you go to sourcing, I'm going to click on plus, and it will add an extra field for us. So I'm going to take density, and everywhere where we have a lot of density, the smoke will be kind of expanding outward and bulging out. So if you set density map into target field divergence, this would do exactly what I said. So it wouldn't be visible that much here, but overall, once we increase the resolution, it will make a difference. Okay, and then for the final look, we can just set it in the viewport, but this will be all set during the render. Let's just set the density to 5, and then the smoke color 0.983 and 0.327. And then this one, red color should be 0. Okay, so we got this kind of color in here. All right, cool. So this is our smoke. In the output, we want to make sure that we are going to output only density, temperature, and velocity. And we want to convert everything to VDB, so it's going to be more optimized. And then for the final resolution, obviously we want to make sure that it is not multiplied to this. And also additionally, what you can do, you can change the advection reflection to single project. This will add pretty much like mini air vorticles and air resistance, and it will add a bit more details to your billowy parts, right? So it will definitely help adding a bit more details. So you can see how it looks here. I recommend caching it out, and then we can also preview this with the pumpkin, right? It looks pretty cool. I'm not sure if it's colliding correctly. Okay, collision, it should be colliding. And then collision set to collision as the F plus volume velocity. Yeah, I think it's colliding. We just see it a little bit stronger on the top. Okay, so after this one, you can basically take this simulation and you can cache this to disk. Again, it's very important to make sure that the collision is matching the distance VDB name. And then after this, yeah, you can definitely see that it's colliding. You can see the ice shape that it's using to collide. So after this one, we can do a file cache. And we can just name this ice smoke. And we can say that I want the base name to be set to node name. Okay, and oh, actually, one more thing before we cache this, I think we need to increase the divergence to match the final result closer. Okay, so with divergence of 10, it should be expanding much more now. Okay, now we should see it better. Okay, so we have more expansion. So at some point, if you didn't move this emitter deep enough into the pumpkin, you know, it can start basically intersecting. You can see that in this part it's intersecting. So that is not going to help the simulation. You definitely want it to be set away as much as possible. Maybe let's set it to 115 so that there is some room for the emitter, right? So if we look at the actual emitter now, yeah, I think if we go to the pyro solver, yeah, so we can see it here. So we want to move it in as much as possible, so it has some room in there. So maybe let's do 125. Okay, and then this would help us to avoid the smoke going through the pumpkin geometry. Although in this one, it kind of looks like it is still not colliding correctly. Maybe we can adjust this a little bit, because when you have the SDF2 high res, it doesn't really match with the other one. And I think I also had the fill interior turned on. You can expand the voxels a little bit. Okay, let's check this one out. Let's see if this is gonna be better. Yeah, I think this one is going to be much better and it's not gonna go through now. So let's check. Yeah, so now you can see it is just exiting through the edges. So yeah, playing with the SDF can definitely give you better results. Make sure there are no holes in your VDB, and then fill interior is quite important here. Okay, so after you are happy with this simulation, you can just save your file. So we're going to save as, I'm going to say effects smoke ice effects. Okay, and then after you saved it, just click save to disk on in background. So one thing to keep in mind, you want to simulate to a specific range. My shot length is from 72 to 168, so that was the actual simulation part that I took, because I didn't want to see the smoke just starting to get out, right? So we are basically cutting into the smoke already being there, and that is actually frame 72, as you can see here, and then it goes to 168. So this is something to think about. So if you want, you can do the same thing. You can actually set your shot fully to that frame length. So if we click on the global animation options on the bottom left, we can say from frame 1 to 168, apply. So now it will default to 168, and then if you click on save to disk in background, this will save the correct range. All right, so I'm going to cache this out, and then we'll be back in the next part where we will do the dry ice coming out from the mouth.